So yesterday I did a full rundown video on the Khmer Rouge where I explained the story behind the Khmer Rouge, the events that took place, how it went down, the origins of the story, the impact of the story, all the genocide that ended up ensuing. But since finishing that video, I have a lot of questions that I need to answer, because I only really hit the surface of the story in that video, and now it's like it's opened up a Pandora's box and I want to know more. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good. Life's good.
I want to know why the US was here, because it seems as though the US played a pivotal role in the Khmer Rouge, because the Khmer Rouge may not have happened if it wasn't for the US being in Vietnam, because, you know, the Vietnam War was going on at the time, and really the Vietnam War and America bombing Cambodia was a huge catalyst for, you know, the whole the Khmer Rouge, you know, coming to rise to power. So the question that I have is, what was the US doing here in the first place? Why were they in Vietnam? And I mean, it's probably a very, very long and complicated story, and there's probably a lot of nuances. But I'm talking to my friend Kim just then. Kim is a Cambodian local from Siem Reap. And as a Cambodian, as a young Cambodian, we're talking about America and Vietnam War and whatnot, and the Khmer Rouge. And he's saying he believes it all goes back to, you know, China and US fighting a proxy war and using Vietnam and Cambodia and a lot of Southeast Asia as the battleground. And it's not really it's not an outlandish statement to make, you know. You only have to look around to Europe to see that all the Middle East for the last decade or more, for the last 2 decades, you only have to look around at those places to see that it's not really uncommon that superpowers like the US, like Russia, use, you know, regions of the world that are unstable as battlegrounds. Anyways, and so he believed that the Khmer Rouge had partly to do with a war between the US and China. Whatever the US was doing here, you know, it's funny because the US used the reason of communism. That was their justification. That's what they sold to the people. That's what their government sold to the people at the time, was the reason for why they had to come to Southeast Asia, to Vietnam, to fight that war that they fought, the Vietnam War. And the reason, that's how their government sold the war to the people and gained support. But is that the real reason? Do you need to fight communism? There was a rise of communism and we need to go and fight it. That's what you sell to the people. I think it's pretty clear from a lot of the accounts that I hear that no one really bought that, because there was huge opposition back in the States and all across the West, if I'm not mistaken. Huge opposition to end that war, for America to get the hell out of there. Not to mention the fact that they weren't succeeding as what they thought either. Like, they were suffering casualties to the extent that they didn't expect, and they definitely didn't want. And that probably partly had to do with the jungle warfare that they were fighting. They had zero experience of jungle warfare. particularly when you compare to the Vietnamese, who are natives in that kind of terrain. But it makes you wonder, like, were they just there to fight communism? That's my question. And the analogy I laid forward to Kim is, I own a house, I live in a house with a family. You live in a house, you own a house, you live in that house with your family. If you have disagreements in your house, hello. If you have disagreements in your house, how does it benefit me to come into your house and solve those disagreements? It doesn't really benefit me. Like, why would I just do that? Why would I give up my time, my energy, my effort to come and solve a problem that doesn't involve me at all, doesn't affect me at all? Same could be said about the whole pitch that was sold to the people at the time. We got to fight communism. We got to fight communism. And you're saying this while you're thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometers away from where this supposed communism was occurring. Why would you need to keep communism under control? As the United States, why would you need to keep communism under control? Why would you need to come to Vietnam and fight this deadly, brutal war for the sake of stopping communism? There's got to be more to it, obviously. And I think people, as time goes on, people realize that more and more and more. And, you know, I think I would like to learn more about this, because I don't want to make any, I don't want to make any assumptions straight away. But just from looking at the situation, I've looked at the whole Khmer Rouge thing, and, I still have a lot more to go in terms of research. But I've looked at some of that. And then I've listened to like some of the rhetoric that come from America, from American media, and how a lot of people don't buy that the US went into Vietnam to get rid of communism or whatever. It doesn't make sense. And that there was another agenda, and that, that of the Vietnam War was one of those events, even though it occurred, in the 60s and 70s, a long time ago now. That was one of the moments where the American people began to lose a lot of confidence and a lot of trust in their government. And, a lot of the distrust and a lot of the, what could you say? Look, America at the moment is not in a very good place. And a lot of that is political. Most of that is political. A lot of it is cultural. And people say that a lot of that goes back to, this distrust in the government, in their government. A lot of that started with things like the Vietnam War, where people felt like they were lied to. They were sold one thing, and then they found out, or they made an assumption that their government lied about it, why they were there, what they were doing there. And then, that was one of the first events. And then you had like the weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, which we've pretty much found out was not true. We went to Iraq because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which is false from what I understand. And then, a whole lot of other things. It's a complicated, nuanced kind of thing to talk about, but that was one of the things that they say. Vietnam War, and the not being transparent about the whole thing, about the whole situation, why they were there, what they were doing there, did they have any business there, what was their actual objective in the end. It doesn't seem to Doesn't seem to add up. But if we're to make one assumption, and it's pretty obvious, it's that the US and the West, they go and fight these wars in these regions of the world for resources. You know, they sell it to the people. They justify, the way of justifying it to the people, the violence and the destruction, is to say these regions of the world are unstable. These regions of the world are unstable. There's danger there. There's communism. In the case of Vietnam, there's weapons of mass destruction in the case of the Middle East. And that's a way of justifying being there and going there. But at the end of the day, you're not just going to go there as a super nation with a healthy, legitimate democracy, a stable, legitimate system. You're not just going to go into an unstable part of the world and fight a war that's not really even yours. You're going in there for resources. That's pretty clear. Middle East, rich in resources. Southeast Asia, rich in resources. Minerals. Cotton, whatever it is. Rich in resources. And that's probably one of the objectives. But it's interesting to hear, now that I've done a bit of research into the Khmer Rouge, it's interesting to hear a Cambodian who's my age, how he thinks about it. And we spoke about it today, me and my friend Kim. We're going to go to one of the museums here that showcases a lot of the history of the Khmer Rouge. Because now, you know, with me, the way it works is I research about one thing and it kind of opens up a Pandora's box. And then I want to learn more and more and more. I only got like a brief little summary yesterday of the Khmer Rouge, and I spoke about it in the video, but now I want to go into like way more depth. And so we're going to go to the museum today. I'm going to do a bit more learning about it because it's really a fascinating topic and event, and it doesn't get spoken about that much, especially not in the West. Like I said yesterday when I was making the video on the Khmer Rouge, I didn't even know about the Khmer Rouge when I came here. So that's how much we don't talk about it. I knew about Stalin, I knew about Hitler, I knew about Mao in China, but I didn't know about Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. It doesn't get spoken about. And perhaps that has something to do with the fact that the US knows it was partly responsible for the outbreak of the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, because it spent so many years in this part of the world fighting a war, destabilizing the region. And what do you get from that? When there's war and power vacuums and violence, you get the rise of genocidal dictators like Pol Pot. Whether he was communist or fascist, doesn't really matter. He's a genocidal dictator. And so we don't really talk about it in the West. I had never heard of it, and I'm pretty well studied. But I think there's a reason for that. Not to be too conspiratorial, but if I were the US, it wouldn't be something I'd be proud of. I wouldn't be proud of the Vietnam War either, because that seemed pointless looking back. And you know, since we've come out of Afghanistan just recently, a year or two ago, that also seems quite pointless. You know, people ask the question, what were we even doing there? Why were we even there? 20 years, the US was there. $300 million per day of taxpayer money. And what did they achieve? Well, Taliban took back control within hours. They achieved absolutely nothing. And so I think, you know, you got the Vietnam War and you got things like that, and the American people have gotten to the point where it's like, this government's not out for our best interest. They're lying to us. They're selling us false narratives. They're telling us there's all this danger on the other side of the world that we have nothing to do with, and we must go and stop it. And they're going and actually benefiting, you know, whoever is benefiting, the ruling class, the elite in America, who, whatever, let's not get into that. But yeah, it's a crazy world. It's a real crazy world.